welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to share the panel here with Judy, Eric, and Blake. We're here to talk about this critical topic of how, in this current economic climate, luxury hotels and owners are seeking to fulfill growth opportunities and how they're looking to grow in this market and expand. We can kick off with introductions, so I'll start over there with Judy Chen, Vice President of Development for Dream Hotels and Hyatt.
Hi everyone, my name is Judy. I'm currently based in Las Vegas. I do development for Dream Hotels, now part of the Hyatt family, and my background's always been in luxury lifestyle, food and beverage, nightlife, and private members clubs.
Eric?
Yep. Hey, hello. Eric Evely. I am the Vice President of Development for the Americas region for SH Hotels and Resorts, which is an affiliate of Starwood Capital Group, based out of New York. I live in Los Angeles, so we have an office in Los Angeles and an office in Miami as well. Prior to that, spent a lot of time in DC with Hilton's and their luxury group. Been in development for the better part of 2 decades.
Hi everyone, Blake Malika, Chief Investment Officer of Tertiary, a company that me and my partner started just recently. I spent about half my career on the brokerage side working for HFF in Los Angeles. Then we were acquired by JLL. Spent some time with them in their San Francisco office before making the switch to the principal side, working for Boulevard Hospitality, a notable owner-developer based in Los Angeles. When I was there, we did the Georgian Hotel, Citizen M, the Hoxton, as well as quite a few others. I also had a short stint with a group called TMGOC Ventures, based in Boca Raton, also an owner-developer. Currently, they are doing the Ritz-Carlton in Savannah, Georgia, as well as multiple Moxies, and they have about 15 properties in their portfolio.
Cool. And I'm Marcus Lee. I'm with HVS. I'm the EVP of Development for HVS. I've been with them for 9 years, with a stint on the other side of the table with Eric and Judy for Rosewood Hotel Group on the development team. At HVS, we do all sorts. You probably know the company from its core competency, doing valuations. Is kind of how the company was started 45 years ago. Founded a methodology to doing hotel appraisals, and it's today the used methodology for the Appraisal Institute here in the U.S. Beyond that, HVS does a whole suite of life cycle hospitality-related consulting, third-party asset management, brokerage, brand and operator search service, and executive search services. With that, let's get started on the panel. We're talking here about luxury hospitality, and we're in the business of people, right? Luxury hospitality, and hospitality in general is about people. So let's start with, our guests. That's really what forms the core of our business. And let's ask, our operators what luxury guests are seeking today. What is given the environment that we're in, the post-pandemic era, what are guests seeking and what are guests looking for? Eric, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think, and it's been said, in a couple of panels, obviously, the talking point is experience, and that's a super important one. I would maybe add a different, adjective, which is distinction and scarcity. I think a luxury has always been about scarcity and doing things that are atypical or highly sought after, but not regularly available. And I think the interesting thing about luxury today is that comes in a lot of different forms than what is traditional. Less tactile, less about the place, and more about the service and again the experience. So it's an evolving concept, but it's certainly, I think, again, more and more about scarcity and just making sure that you're doing something that is atypical.
And I think coming from the lifestyle space as it relates to luxury, people want value nowadays. And I don't mean value in the dollar sense, but value in, is this the best way I can spend my time and money? Because you have so many options right now with all the different brands and what they offer. Back to the distinction, what can you do that's different that they can't get anywhere else? Because at the end of the day, as an operator or a developer, your costs are set with what properties you own and how much it costs to keep it running, where is that ancillary revenue coming from? So with luxury, you have beautiful amenities. Is there programming on top of that to really capture the audience so that they come, stay longer, and spend more? So I think what our guests want is not just something that's distinctive and different, but also something memorable and something that makes it worth their time when they have so many other options today to pick from.
Sure. I'm going to pick off the value proposition that Judy just mentioned and kind of pivot over to Blake a little bit from an owner standpoint. We talk about value and how brands create value for the guests, but at the same time, it's important also to create value for owners, right? At the end of the day, it's an investment proposition that needs to generate a return there. So given the increasing cost of operations, really, cost of goods sold, wages, et cetera, how are you guys seeing value creation from an ownership standpoint?
Yeah, so essentially, we're looking at it as this is somewhat have been tough times for the last few years in the hospitality world. And so this has been a big task of ours is, hey, maybe a project we got involved in isn't quite at projections where we want it to be. And the way we've gone about adding value is, first off, not being afraid to spend a little bit of money to make a lot more. I'll give you one example. A hotel that we fully repositioned, the Georgian Hotel in Santa Monica, we were coming out of the reposition, ramp wasn't quite where we wanted it. We were getting budgets and things from our management companies, and it was well below where we would have liked to see it. So we basically went back to the team and said, how are we going to increase this? What we found was a multitude of ways to do it. One good example was, we said, hey, we need to start doing some more marketing. We need to go find a rock star. We really need to invest in the team because really the people on site as well as, asset managers are a huge player in this field. And so we went out, we hired a woman that had a great background, was well connected in the community in LA. She was at a much higher salary level than our director of sales are typically at. But what we found was, she had this great network. She was able to secure Hollywood Reporter that does this roundtable. They do it every few weeks, and they have multiple celebrities come, and they sit around a table. And ultimately, we got celebrities like Bradley Cooper, Margaret Robbie, Billie Eilish to come to our hotels. And this was happening every 2 weeks for months. And, up front, if you went and paid for that type of marketing or advertising, it would have cost a fortune. But by going about it in a different way, we were able to get this tremendous upside. And it was even interesting as how much that snowballed, right? It was, hey, there's celebrities in our hotel. Then celebrities in the neighborhood, like Harrison Ford, he would come there for lunch, dinner, and it just kind of, grew value that way. Other things we had done that some people, tend to shy away from is, putting in live music. A lot of people look at that and they say, well, it's expensive. You go hire a company and bring them in. Well, what we did is we kind of approached it in a different way. We knew that there were specific individuals that were great at music and knew of acts that we could get in for $100 for the whole night or things like that. And when we did repeat people in there, and we were able to bring that atmosphere, bring that liveliness to our outlets at a very cost-effective option, which for us, little things like that, you might have spent, hey, an extra 10 grand here or there, but it was, bringing in $1 million here or there too. So, that's really how we've kind of looked at things in a different way and perspective than what the market might be saying off the top.
Can we ask a question?
Please, go ahead.
I don't know what the process is.
Go for it.
Go for it. We're here for you.
You probably know us. We're building a hotel in Miami, starting with Capital that's Southwest 11 brand. And we're struggling, or at least in concept, to balance the topic we're discussing right now, which is how do you convince a potential asset manager and an owner that are looking at this as an investment, we're looking at ROI percentages and leveraged investment with providing luxury that inevitably has costs associated with it.
Right.
Programming, as you said, that an owner or an investment firm might not necessarily appreciate and may think it's excess. How do you leverage that to say, listen, this is part of a soft cost for your investment to reach 20, 21% or whatever it is?
Yeah, so, how we've done it, right, and looking at some of our,
We don't have Bradley.
what'd you say? Yeah. No, so how we've done that, right? So, and just to kind of give you some gist on it, so we have investors in our company as well, and so when we have to go back and say, hey, we need to spend that a little bit of extra money to go make these things happen, the way that we've done it is, as I mentioned with that woman, we brought her in, actually had her sit down and explain who she knew, where she was going to bring value, and even talk about some of the things she had done in the past. And so it was for them, it was this real life experience that they were like, wow, that person knows this, that, and that got them excited. I think on, maybe more of what you're thinking on some of these other programs is, if you look at maybe that programming, you're looking at an F&B and you're like, hey, I think it's going to make a lot, right? What we've done is we've based it a lot on comps. So we would go around, we'd build out a new network of people that are the ultimate, movers in that market, and basically, get their, or how they've been doing, get their data, and understand, basically present to them these comps lists that basically show somebody has a proven track record of doing that way, and then copying that is essentially what we've done to kind of get them over the hump. As well as on top of that, some of these projects like the hotel projects, we have been in where we're like, hey, we need to go to a larger customer base. So we're going and getting a soft brand, or we're going and getting a leading hotels of the world that doesn't necessarily brand the hotel, but it works in a similar way where you're getting their huge customer base as an interested customer in yours, and leveraging the data because they're a platform, and taking that and basically putting that into our projects and selling the story that way to investors.
I would kind of key off of that in terms of, from an asset management standpoint, a lot of it is kind of like what Blake is saying is, data driven. How can we sell this to ownership with data? So, it might be one of those instances where your asset manager is from, one of those big third-party asset management companies that has access to this pool of data that have proven track records on, what this kind of net spend for a particular marketing project or, revenue push or sales push, like what is that going to get you from an ownership standpoint, and is there really an ROI to be had here for the owner and the investors? And if so, then that might be something actionable, and if not, it's easy to kind of avoid.
I think there is a bit of a caution just thinking about luxury from an investment perspective. If the notion is, we're going to target, high yield on cost, and that's our ultimate goal, in the luxury space, just given the cost to develop, it's always going to be a fight. And so the notion is, how do we combat that as much as possible? Because again, most of the value in luxury hotels is on exit and or alternative product types, right? Like the sale of residential or alternative revenue sources. If it's truly and strictly about yield on cost, then data has to be the driving force. What is actually important? I think that's the cool thing about luxury today is it's not so prescriptive. It is very much an evolving concept about what's really important to people, what distinguishes that experience or that stay from the next or from a more typical one that most of the masses can afford. And if you have that data, you can start to think about interesting ways to provide those experiences that do provide, thankfully, benefits on the cost side. Thinking about examples like, you have a typical 3-meal restaurant in most hotels, or on the development side in an urban location, our bathtubs really that critical to the experience, and having the data points to say these things are important, those things are important, allows you to do things like say, what if we just had a really kick-butt 4-fixture bathroom instead of a 5? That saves us $20,000 per key on the development side. Or what if our 3-meal and our coffee shop split the 3-meal periods, and so we save on the operational side during dead periods. The guest won't care if you have the data and you can back it up that it doesn't impact them one way or the other. Then you can start to be creative about it, and then focus on the things that actually do matter, like great experiences, high concept dinner moments, really good banquet facilities that are appropriate to a luxury customer, those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a segue onto here. We're talking about growth, growth in this sector, And we've kind of brought up the, the elephant in the room, right? The high development costs and the, somewhat prohibitive costs of developing in the last few years. At HVS, every year we release the development cost survey. It's been done for 40 years or so. The last 2 surveys that we've released, you've really kind of seen that stark increase in costs. In 2022, costs were up by 8%, and by year end of 2023, it was up by 6% year over year. So Eric kind of alluded to this, so maybe I can start with Judy. So how are brands approaching, growth in this kind of environment where, owners are getting squeezed a little bit in terms of construction costs? The last survey that I mentioned for development cost survey in the luxury space, as defined by STR, per key construction costs have topped $1 million. So how are we speaking to owners from a brand development standpoint and, justifying this position of building luxury and, what is the value there for ownership?
I think we have to look at it from the other perspective is the audience, right? It's gonna cost me the same amount of time and cost to build a project in a certain location. Is the market there? Am I going to get the return that I want? I'm a little bit contrary in the sense that I love bringing luxury and lifestyle to smaller markets, secondary and tertiary markets. I'm very bullish on because you have a lower barrier to entry, you have less competition, and you have markets that are in clientele that's starving for something that they don't have in the New York, Miami, LAs of the world. So when I started with Dream 7 years ago, my colleagues were going to Maldives and all of the main city centers and the resort destinations, which I think makes perfect sense for luxury and lifestyle. But I also think nowadays your guest is so sophisticated everywhere. The Milwaukees of the world, the Kansas cities, and when there's not that much competition, it's easier to build, and I can make a lot more money on the back end once it is up and running versus competing with another location that has 10 hotels vying for my same clientele. So I wouldn't shy away from looking at markets that are more pioneering. We like being in luxury and lifestyle. You can set the tone for how a lot of new product is brought into the market. We like being unique anyway, so I actually don't mind when there's less of a comp set to work with as we build projects. And obviously, as a function of cost, it's both with the construction and also renovations and reflags. I mean, I think every deal is different. It's a case-by-case basis. Some renovations, with older buildings don't make as much sense. So I think in terms of a general overall strategy, I think to go where the cost is less prohibitive is a good time right now to be looking at places where you normally wouldn't consider. And also to think creatively. A lot of our projects now have branded residences components, ways for our developers to offset the costs by bringing in a different aspect that they can finance. So I think deal structures are also getting more creative.
I think it's a really interesting, the benefit of the modern luxury traveler is exactly what you just said, Judy, which is, I think historically, if you looked at our past generation, and my parents are a good example of this. We lived in Los Angeles, in San Diego as I was growing up. We would always go to Lake Arrowhead every single year, Lake Arrowhead. And now I think the desire to just do the same thing every year is going by the wayside. And now luxury travelers today want to try different places because they offer different things. And again, if it's all about the currency of experience, those differentiated experiences matter. And so there's a benefit to that trend, and then you layer on the idea that the cost of employment is cheaper in places like Fredericksburg, Texas, instead of Napa, if you want a wine experience, or it's cheaper to go to San Miguel de Allende if you want a sort of a cultural experience versus Cabo, and it's certainly cheaper to build in those places. And so I think it's the combination of being a little bit more adventurous as a developer and saying we're gonna go place make in a new place, or at least be on the forefront of it, that offers some characteristics that are important to a luxury customer, and we'll get the benefits of lower cost to develop. Employment costs will be a little bit lower, although you do have to plan for things like employee housing and making sure they're taken care of and training. But there's a benefit to that. So it's the same puzzle. It's just it's the different pieces to get to the same answer.
Yeah, and I think on that point too, and just to kind of as like one example, so a project that we're doing currently, we're working on buying an entire city block in Dubuque, Iowa. Not necessarily a go-to market by any means. As part of that, we're going to have a hotel, 2 F&B outlets, and then actually a bulk distillery on the back side of it. And in that project, when we're thinking about it, that town is just under 100,000 people. They don't have necessarily the same drivers as some of the other larger cities, but they do have a significant amount of people with money to spend that ultimately don't have an option in that market. There's one hotel that's an older boutique hotel that's somewhat higher end, but we're looking at that as, hey, we're going to be the only player in that space. We're going to be in the main part of town at a significant discount to if we went to a Chicago or one of these other ones where we have to overspend. Then we also have to deal with legislation issues, tax issues, and this one it has some existing buildings, so even that basically permitting process to go through with that is extremely lengthened, where in this specific market, we're going to get these things done in 2 months versus a year or 2 or 5. So I think that's where we're really kind of excited about some of these tertiary markets, like she mentioned.
I mean, who would have thought, the Six Senses is coming an hour and a half outside of Pittsburgh, right, to the middle of a beautiful country. That's where the Falling Waters famous home is. But other than that, there's not much out there. But what they've noticed is people want to get away and try something new. And that's a beautiful part of the country that not a lot of people have experienced. And they're going to bring their Six Senses, experiential product and have at it. And I think that's where you can start to, again, it could be a home run, it could be a failure, but at least I think it's something different and it resonates and it'll certainly be sought after, at least for a few years.
Well, also with today's guests, people like the sense of discovery. So to create something new and a destination that may not have been proven yet, I think is actually resonates really well with today's audience. People like to discover something new. They like to be the first amongst their friends to say, hey, I went here, this is what I did, versus something like you said, traditionally in the past, your family would go to the same place every year. Yeah. The modern traveler is not like that anymore. They want different for their Instagram all the time.
Plus, if you look at it, like Cabo is a great example. It was a small fisherman's town, and where the one and only Palmilla was built is like the perfect location. And if you tried to get that real estate today, it would be so astronomical it would never make sense. But back then, it was very much on the forefront. It was a little bit like, what are you doing? But again, they were visionaries, and there's markets like that all over the place that potentially could be a project could be the spearhead for a community of projects that really place-make something really special. And so that's what everybody's driving for. Certainly what we're looking for. We love that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the Tulum of like 20 years ago.
Exactly right, yeah.
Yep.
So we've spoken about markets and all these special markets there, that where people want to expand into, and be kind of the first there. Let's talk about hospitality concepts as well, unique concepts. We're here in Las Vegas, a host city. Judy's a local here. This city arguably is kind of one of the hospitality centers of the world, certainly one for pioneering brand new, innovative hospitality concepts, right? I mean, you look around, look at the buildings. What are you seeing, Judy? Are you seeing any brand new hospitality concepts? What's the latest trends and concepts that's coming out of this city that could be replicated in these markets we were talking about?
What I love about this market is you can really try anything, and so you get the chance to really see different types of food and beverage and hotel concepts. What I think, though, is really truly missing here still is luxury lifestyle. Everything here is in a larger scale, so part of my deal analysis isn't just to see what's there, but also to see what's not there that we can bring that's different for our clientele. I love all the things that Vegas has done to diversify its offerings to the guests, and nowadays the traveler that is coming here is more well-heeled, so they do want more luxury offerings, which traditionally, the 99-cent buffets and all that is very much a thing of the past. The ticket cost for a F1 concert or a Sphere concert is very cost prohibitive for a lot of locals. So the next generation of travelers that are coming here want something more upscale. They want something unique. We are looking at everything from, 5-dimensional mapping in a restaurant to, the old school supper clubs of yore, and they're even bringing back old school gaming, like at Circus. There's a Slots of Fun where you can go and have actual coin slot machines. So you go in, it feels like you're back in the 70s, and you hear the sounds, and that's very nostalgic, and it's very cool, and it's very not, I think there's definitely lots of great new restaurant concepts, not just coming in, but also now Vegas has evolved into having concepts going out. Back in the day, this was where all the celeb chefs would come, and now you have great local chefs who are making their mark from off-strip to the strip to New York, Miami, LA. So it's definitely ground zero. I think the only other market that I would compare it to would probably be Dubai, in terms of things where you can really take big chances and see, how things resonate with the audience.
Sure. Another question for this panel, really, and let's start with Blake, is we have a lot of owners in the room. Obviously, the luxury hotel segment is, out of the grand scheme of things, the smallest tier, right? The smallest pie in terms of the number of owners and investors. There are a lot more in the mid-scale, upper upscale, all the way down to economy scale. There might be owners who are looking at this from an aspirational perspective. What would you say to an owner that's looking to get into this space? What are kind of the things that you need to think of, need to get done before, taking the plunge?
Yeah, and the first thing I would say on that too, it's the luxury and the lifestyle space. It's kind of interesting is you're starting to see the big brands like Hilton and Marriott and Hyatt, that they're actually starting to look at some of these lifestyles like an auto camp, like a Hoxton brand that's an Ennismore, like things like that they're trying to consolidate, go out and get that. Standard Brands just got bought. I think a lot of people are seeing this value driver in the lifestyle market, right? We know we have these customers that are willing to pay for the extra services. And I think they're going out of their way now, and if I'm an owner, I'd start to say, hey, we need to bake this in. And if maybe you're still doing a hard brand, but you're adding in, this extra F&B, creativity component to it, I think that's, a huge value driver in our industry right now. And I think it's going to be the kind of the trend going forward, and why, those big brands like a Hilton or a Hyatt are actually, buying these type of names for their larger brand families, because that's, kind of the future, in my opinion.
I would say if you're sort of a developer and you're trying to get into the luxury space, or you're interested in it, or you've dipped your toes, as you're saying, to me the ultimate decision should be the value the brand brings, relative to demand generation, their ability to attract and appeal to customers for the type of product they're targeting, versus their fee load or their ability to really differentiate. And I think there are certain brands, and it's the reason why consolidation happens in the space, is because that first part of it is tough. It's tough to find a large volume of loyal customers who are loyal to a specific brand. And certain brands have it. We call them love brands, but they're distinctive enough that regardless of their affiliation with something larger than them, they have a following. We think the One Hotel brand has that. We're trying to build that with some of our other brands. The original W brand had that for a long time. There are brands like Four Seasons who have it in spades, and there's brands like Aman who just have that cult-like following, because they've managed to do something so distinctive, so they bring their own horsepower to it. And then again, that leads to their performance. And again, I think the luxury space is the toughest if you're in it for the typical reasons of yield on cost, and a quick, nice, large IRR, right? It's got to be more about legacy, and I think it's got to be more about just a very thoughtful execution of what your goals are. And ideally, it's to hold it long term and be a placemaker. Be someone who makes a true difference in the hospitality space. And if you happen to, make out like a bandit, relative to returns, that's fantastic. But I think the ultimate goal should be placemaking, creating great experiences for customers because that's your passion.
Well,
Authenticity too.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that's what big.
and the one thing I would just mention too with that, you know, if you're trying to be a new developer and you're wanting to get into it is, right now in today's market, a big reason why you're not seeing a lot of the big private equity funds and all these other groups super active in the space is, you know, there's nervousness, there's hesitation about what's in the future. And I think, you know, that actually opens an opportunity for the smaller guy to come in and do some of these deals. And I think what's really important is making sure that you don't overspend up front. There are deals out there that you can get at significant discounts, which, you know, that helps you obviously a lot on the front end. And, you know, there's a lot of deals out there where there's, you know, they got their loan 5 years ago when times were great and they're starting to expire and they're going to go from 3% interest up to 6, or, you know, kind of that, you know, daunting issue from their end where you can come in, get it for 10, 15% off to start off on the right foot and then create this extra value through some of the lifestyle items we mentioned earlier.
Judy, coming from a brand that recently did an acquisition, right, of Standard Hotels, what do you think of this space? You know, Eric kind of alluded to it. There are a lot of brands in this luxury and lifestyle space. Is it crowded? Is it too crowded? What are you seeing the future of this space?
I mean, I think it's great that there, you know, I've never heard the term love brands, which I think is actually, I think it makes perfect sense. It's hard to create a vision of and a brand identity, and I feel like there is a lot of brands out there right now, but I feel like each has been really careful about kind of delineating the lane that they're in. So I think while there are a lot of brands, there is a reason why the big companies are acquiring the smaller companies. They each bring a different perspective and clientele that may not have been part of their original portfolio, which obviously adds value to the company in general. I do think as brands continue to consolidate under a bigger umbrellas, it's just most important that you stay true to the vision of what you represented before and be able to still do your F&B well and still do your activations and programming well, and not lose sight of what was acquired to begin with. But, you know, people nowadays love all different options, so I don't think that, you know, there's just one right answer for a certain brand or a certain program. I think there's a lot of room for everyone to bring something different to the table.
Great. On the note of getting too crowded, we don't want you guys waiting in line at the reception where it's too crowded. I want to open the floor up here to the room, to any questions that you guys might have for these esteemed panelists. Back.
Question. You know, with the consolidations going on and the acquisitions taking place, how do you keep ownership groups happy when the brand that they thought, the lifestyle brand they thought they were signing up with, then gets purchased by one of the big ones? Because we've had some clients want to bail out once that happens.
Termination clause? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. How much?
No, it's a really interesting question, and I will say in a lot of our negotiations, if not all of them, that comes up, specifically with my company, just because we are at that moment, right? We are a smaller company, and even though it is backed by Barry Stern Lichten, and there's a really strong pedigree of growing brands and growing a company to a massive scale, there is still always that chatter, right, about these are really good brands, and wouldn't it be interesting if one of the bigger brands sort of sought them out? And I think for all of the small brands, they have to come up with this. There's this moment where you have to either double down with resources and really buy into a long-term venture, or you have to do what some of those who are in the 2 to 3 property scale have done, which is they have good perception, they have really good properties, maybe a few of them. They're just not willing to take that next step, so they consolidate. And I think the way to, and if you ultimately do that, it's exactly what you said, and certain companies do it really well, and others not as well, is stay true to what those brands are, right? Make sure that they're differentiated and distinctive, and more importantly, the talent that runs within the building and sort of oversees the brands sort of remains on course for what ultimately that brand is intended to be. It's very easy to sort of say, okay, we're gonna buy this brand because it is so interesting and unique and quirky, and the people are really interesting, and vibrant and talented in their own special way. And we're going to swallow them and sort of bring them into this broader generic engine. And I think you obviously get lost in that. So I think you have to hopefully promise and try really hard to tell owners that won't happen and just be true to it.
Any other questions in this room?
So in developments, how do you think about segmentation of verticals? Let's say you have 100 keys, 150 keys. Whether acquisition or new development, how do you think about the difference between a standard room and suites for hospitality? Because at the end of the day, you're looking at a blended APR, you're looking at a blended RevPAR. How do you look at that?
So I would say on that front, it's a multitude of things that we're looking at. You know, the first thing we're doing is we're looking at that specific market, and if it's a large market, the sub-market in itself, and saying, hey, do all the other hotels have suites in them, or do they not? Because if they do, you know, we want to go and compete against them. And maybe they don't have any, and so you want to have a few so you can be that single offering. So it kind of starts with that. You know, we leverage from our end, you know, the management companies to run surveys and kind of give us their thoughts around, you know, what the layout should be. You know, you also need to take into account in like certain markets like LA, you know, the bigger rooms are more expensive to clean, right? So, you know, we look at that, and it's ultimately, we have a projections where we want them to be, and it's kind of getting information from all these different groups and then coming up with, hey, this is what makes sense for us. And then I think also, you know, when you're doing your brand selection, you know, there are certain brands like a Moxie, for instance, where they're geared towards a certain customer that needs a small room, just wants, you know, the bed for overnight, but wants a great F&B. You know, if you're looking at something like that, obviously it's kind of a clear option in that front. So it's, you know, we also are kind of bringing that as a whole is, do we want to be branded? If we do we want to be included in that? You know, and that's kind of some of the different items we bring into that decision from our end.
In some of the ways, it is follow the leader, right? What does the comp set sort of generally offer? And if you are intending to position yourself within that, you're better or worse in some fashion programmatically. It is interestingly, it's a very common conversation to have with developers about, you know, how many suites are necessary. If I'm strictly looking at this on a dollar per square foot basis, nothing yields more revenue per foot than a standard room, right? You can take two bays and make a suite. It won't offer the same revenue per foot as two standard rooms. But I think it's a bit of a pitfall or a trap to think about it like that. And it's more about thinking about the revenue management from the top down. If you think about how do I source the right types of clients that will drive the perception and the business that we want, and what are they expecting? If they expect certain types of suites and a certain number of suites, then provide those and then let the standard rooms draft behind them in a certain way, versus establishing a base of standard rooms and then just, you know, adding premium for a certain amount of suites. Because then you get into that conversation of, do I really need 10%? Can I have 5%? Does it really matter? And in our mind, you know, for our brands, it absolutely matters. I think we generally have a percentage of 15% suites for most of our properties that generate about 35% of our revenue in the room. So it's outsized. And I think for our properties where the suite mix is lower, the standard room base rate is lower. And so again, it's very complicated to sort of build up the stack of revenues per room type. But they're certainly needed. And again, it more goes to what's the expectation of the customer in that market, and be better than or worse than on purpose.
It's got to be different if you're talking about, that's the other question, what's luxury? I mean, all throughout this conference, someone's going to be talking about 500 a night versus 5,000 a night. You know, the segmentation days, the difference between full service and, you know, mid-scale and luxury is a whole new paradigm. I mean, you mentioned $1 million a square foot. Homie mentioned $3 million a key.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, that's the other half of the question is, you know, what's the nomenclature, the language that we're using to really identify what these things are. That was helpful to hear.
So like I could start with that in terms of how it's segmented. Yes, I think the industry hasn't yet evolved to that point where we have that segmentation, just like how upper upscale split from upscale, right, in terms of STR segmentation. I mean, even within HVS now, we look at these luxury hotels as kind of entry-level luxury, and we call another set called the ultra luxury, which is your Amans and basically what Homie was mentioning in terms of development costs. That's how it's looked at, and that's kind of how we've looked at benchmarking and looking at P&L benchmarking, cost benchmarking, and all that going forward. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, I just don't think the data benchmarking or data analytics industry have yet quite caught up to those nomenclatures yet, but it's there. I think there's becoming a delineation right now. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned, because you triggered some thoughts, and I know you
That's great. We did our job.
once in a while you trigger thoughts. You have a hotel like One, and I'm from Miami, so that's very personal to me, which is one of the highest ADRs of that geofencing area.
Mhm.
But then you talk about data. If I were an investor and you come to me and say, build me a hotel that's a One, I'm not going to look at the concept of the Mandarin. I'm not going to look at the concept of the Ritz, because I'm being a visionary, perhaps in an area that I'm gentrifying now, that may have been very urban, not necessarily the case for One, but I'm now entering placemaking, and I love that word that you said. Why would I be guided by stats and SDR reports, 10, 15% ratios for suites and rooms, when I'm trying to create a luxury brand that is unique, that really doesn't have
Comps, natural comps.
not only comes, but doesn't have experience in that market.
Mhm.
So that's sort of,
Well, what I would,
pardon me?
yeah, what I would say on that too, and kind of thinking about, like for instance, the Georgian Hotel that I did in Santa Monica. When we were doing that vision, right? Santa Monica, it has the proper hotel, which is done well, but it's not on the beach. There's the Malibu Beach Inn, which is up the road, but not necessarily Santa Monica. And then there's a few big boxes there. None of them were really super comparative. And so, from that, also you have the Oceana, which is an LXR. We basically started with, all right, that's our initial comp set. And then we went from there and we said, let's look at, some of these other markets that have a similar layout to that. So we, went to a sub-market in Beverly Hills and we pulled a few of them that had this, call it, creative side to it, right? This, people want to be cool. They want to walk into that door. And we started pulling some of those. So we kind of had like a secondary comp set, right? And we started to craft this story. And just as like a metrics from that, that initial set, it had ADRs from 500 to 800. But that other set had ADRs from 1,000 to 1,500. And it was like the Peninsula, it was the Beverly Hills Hotel. And so we basically went with basically a presentation that said, hey, we're creating something in between these, right? We think we're going to be $1,200 or $1,000, right? And went with that is really our basis and thesis for it. There's no perfect, science to it. It's all of an art. And that's ultimately how we kind of approach getting it there. And I think that same applies to other markets. And even with my new company now, we're Midwest focused. And we're going to have to do a lot of that. And we already have, because, you're convincing, these partners to come in with you into a market that's never seen a $300 a room cost, right? And so you've got to create that by saying, hey, in Nashville, the W just sold for $900,000 a door, and I know Nashville is not even that comparative. You can go to like a Milwaukee, they're still lower there. And it's basically just pulling from these different ones where there's a story that goes with that comp to create your larger story and pointing to it.
And knowing your clientele well, what do they want, what's missing that they would spend money for. I think that's also important too. It's not just what you're bringing, but you're bringing something that your guests are seeking.
At the end of the day, it's a people business, just to add to that, right? So this is about people, and yes, we mentioned data and stats, but ultimately behind the data and stats, there needs to be, the HVSs of the world, the JLLs of the world, where a human is interpreting that data and making sure it fits and forms with the project you're looking at. That one hotel project, it's very special, but your rooms are bigger than the average in Miami. That's kind of the reason why that ADR is strong, and to have that nuance, and that's the human touch. And we're in a people business for that. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you guys for being here. Thank you to my fellow panelists for an excellent presentation. Enjoy the drinks and enjoy the conference.